guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my favorite authors that I read in 2021. I have a few parameters that I gave myself for putting authors on this list, otherwise I would just put a bunch of my favorite authors on this list with the, no rhyme or reason. There's just two rules. I had to read them in 2021, and I had to have read more than one book by them, because if I only read the one book, can I really say that they're a favorite, or did they just write one really good book to me? Or at least that makes sense to me. I don't know. But I do have a fairly short list, and I just wanted to jump right into it. So the very first one on my list is M.A. Carrick, which is actually an author duo made up of Marie Brennan and Alice Helms. They both teamed up and they wrote The Liar's Knot, which is obviously by M.A. Carrick. First of all, appreciate the gorgeousness of this cover, if we can, with this glare. We'll try it though. Like, isn't it so beautiful? The second one's in a different room, so I'm not gonna hold that one up. But this was far and away one of my absolute favorite books of the year. That video will hopefully be coming out next week, and I'll talk about it more then. But The Mask of Mirrors, I had received an arc of it. Ember, this is inconvenient. I had received an arc of it towards the beginning of the year, and I absolutely loved it. It's full of ballroom politics, political intrigue. It's full of awesome magic systems that involve like kind of a tarot style, fortune telling, astrology, all of the above. Dream magic. It's so good. I don't really know how to describe it. I talked about it in I believe my January wrap-up if you wanted to go back and look at it. The writing style was so seamless, and the one thing that I love about the author duos that I have read that I've enjoyed is that you can't really tell whose voice it is talking, and I appreciate that because I feel like when you can tell, it's just a little bit jarring to your reading experience. M.A. Carrick just writes so seamlessly between the different points of view, and all of it just kind of built up into an amazing book. I have The Liar's Knot, which is book 2. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. I cannot wait to start reading it. I haven't unfortunately gotten around to it yet, but I am hearing really good things from the people that have gotten to it so far, so I'm pretty excited for it. I feel like it's also worth mentioning that, like I said, Marie Brennan is one half of this duo, and Marie Brennan wrote the Lady Trent series, which involves a lady scientist that goes around in a fantasy Elizabethan England kind of a world where she wants to study dragons, but society looks down on that kind of a thing, but she does it anyway. And I read the first book in the series. My husband John has read more of them, and he absolutely loves them. I really enjoyed the first one. Definitely give Marie Brennan and or M.A. Carrick with The Mask of Mirrors a shot if you haven't yet, because definitely one of my top reads of the year. And it just occurred to me that I know that I only said that I read Mask of Mirrors, but I am including M.A. Carrick / Marie Brennan on this list just because I have read Natural History of Dragons, and technically that is 2 books by one author in the duo. I'm counting it because it deserves to be mentioned. The next author that is on my list is another author duo, but I have read multiple books in this series, and I think that it will hold true for the remainder of the series as well, and that is James S.A. Corey, who wrote the Expanse series. This is another author duo. Like I said, it's made up of Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. I have not read anything else by either of these authors. I know that one of them is like an apprentice or something to George R.R. Martin, for whatever that's worth, but this book, let me just tell you, this book, when I read it, I was unable to put it down, and this is in stark contrast to when I watched the TV show, which was before I realized it was even based on a book. It took me about 3 tries to actually finish the first season. Once I started reading the books, I started watching the TV show and I was hooked. But the books are really what I fell in love with. And all of these, again, they're so seamless when they write together. You jump around from different points of view, but you really can't tell that it's a different author writing throughout the entire thing. I don't know what their writing process is. I don't know how they managed to pull this off, but it is so incredibly good. So far, the second book in the series has been my favorite. Leviathan Wakes was a very, very close second, though. But if you haven't checked out the Expanse series, absolutely give it a shot if you like space opera sci-fi, because it's just so good. The action is great. The banter is entertaining. I just love everything about this. I am on book 4. I need to start it, I think there's 9 books total in the series, so obviously I'm very, very far behind, but I've enjoyed every single one that I've read up until this point. I don't see that changing, like I said. The next author on this list is one that I discovered just a few months ago. I also just read an arc of the second book in this series, and I loved it just as much, and that is Andrea Stewart, who wrote the Drowning Empire series. We are only 2 books in so far, but the first one is The Bone Shard Daughter. If you haven't read this yet and you love any kind of unique fantasy magic, this is very, very different from anything that I have ever read before. The closest comparison that I can make is Foundry Side, where they are using like scribing onto objects to give it directions, except in this, it requires a bone shard from a living person. I think it has to be a person. And somebody with knowledge of this magic has to inscribe the bone shard with special sigils and things like that, and they can actually make a construct kind of like a clone, but it's actually just like built from parts of other things. So there's like these gigantic beasts kind of walking around that have instructions written literally on the bone shards that make up their body, that tell them specific things that they are supposed to do or take care of or pay attention to. Some of them are so complex that they're actually kind of like ministers of commerce and ministers of trade. It's so different, and I've never heard of anything like this. There's another magic system as well, and it delves into animal companions. It's so good. If you haven't given it a shot, go check it out, because Mephi deserves everybody's attention. He is a precious little cinnamon roll. So is Jovis, but like Mephi is really where it's at, and if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. He is an adorable little cat-like, otter-like, horned creature. He's precious, and he needs to be protected at all costs. The second book, I liked it. I didn't like it quite as much as the first book, but it's possible that it was just like a second book syndrome kind of a deal. So I'm really, really looking forward to where Andrea Stewart goes with the rest of the series, because she's been setting a lot of stuff up, and we kind of left off on a cliffhanger in the Bone Shard Emperor, and I really, really, really need to know what happens next. So the next author on this list I discovered over the summer, and I know that a lot of people already like him as a fantasy author, but this was the first time reading his books for me. I read the first 2 books in this series, and that is Sebastian de Castell and his Great Coats series, because I read the first 2, and the humor in both of them was right up my alley. There were parts of it that were not humor-wise, but plot-wise, that I just felt were unnecessary or highly unlikely, but it's okay. I looked past it because the voice that Sebastian de Castell writes in is perfect for me. He writes from the first-person perspective of Falchio del Monde, and it is so entertaining being in Falchio's head. Sometimes it's a little bit depressing, but a lot of the times it's deeply entertaining. And his friends, Kest and Brosti, they're all so great together. It's a great found family element. The tone that he writes in is just so lighthearted while he's delving into some very serious and dark topics, and yet it feels like you're watching, I don't really know how else to describe it, but like you're watching a Three Musketeers movie. It's just that kind of banter going back and forth all the time while they're dealing with very serious subject matters. It's exactly what I was looking for when I picked this up. The audiobook was fantastic. The narrator is great. I definitely liked the first book more than the second one, but I enjoyed my experience with the second one as well. I can't wait to move on in the other 2 books in the series, and he has another series that I would like to check out, which is, I think it starts with Spellslinger. I don't know what the series name is, but his writing style in both of these, while it may be different from what Spellslinger is, has absolutely convinced me that I want to keep reading what he's writing. The next author, I don't actually have a physical copy of any of his books, but I read the first 2 books, the only 2 that are out in this series, and I would like to read more from him, is Robert Jackson Bennett. He wrote the Founders Trilogy, which is comprised right now of Foundry Side and Shorefall. There's a 3rd book coming out, I think, next year, and I am very much so looking forward to it after what Shorefall left off on. But his writing style, once again, it's just right up my alley. The humorous tone that he kind of gives to it, a lot of people think is childish. I honestly just found deeply entertaining. It kept me engaged in the storyline. The main character, Sanchia, kept me engaged in the storyline, even as she frustrated me at times. I just enjoyed everything about the magic system, which I just talked about a little bit earlier with the Bone Shard Daughter. So scribing involves writing instructions on an object, and they kind of change its perspective of reality, even though it's an inanimate object. So for example, you could scribe an arrow to make it think that it is falling straight down from the sky so that it goes straight and fast in one direction, whereas when in actuality it is actually flying forward. You can scribe objects to think that they are being less affected by gravity and therefore they can float. Wheels, you can scribe them to think that they are moving down a hill and so they will just keep turning and turning and turning. Things like that. And it was such a cool experience because I had never seen anything like that before. I was so entertained. I was entertained by all of the characters. I thought that they were incredibly engaging and the storyline was just so good. I know I'm probably repetitive on all of these and how much I love these, but honestly, Foundryside and Shorefall were two of my top reads of this entire year, and I cannot wait to read the third book in the series, the name of which is escaping me at this moment. Lock something, maybe? I don't know. He also has a different series, and it's got to do with like the City of Gods or the City of Stairs? There's a city of something. Gods are involved somehow. I'm not 100% sure how, but I have been told that it is a really, really great series, and I am deeply intrigued to read more by him. The last author that I'm going to talk about on this list is Sarah Beth Durst, and I read the first two books in her Queens of Renthia series just last month or the month before, I believe, and they were fantastic. Again, I don't have a physical copy of any of her books to show you, so I'll pop a picture of the cover up, which is beautiful, by the way. I think that they're great. The magic system is not necessarily one that I've never heard of before, where it involves like nature spirits. However, the difference is that the nature spirits despise humans and they hate them so much that their natural inclination is to just murder all of them. But they can't murder all of them because they do need humans, whereas humans also need the nature spirits to function. Without them, trees wouldn't grow, fire wouldn't burn, things like that. So there are women around this world, and I believe that it's only women, that are able to control nature spirits, and because of this, the most powerful of them are trained to become heirs to the kingdom. When one of them ascends to queen, she actually has the ability to control all of the nature spirits in the entire country and keep them from murdering people while they are doing their jobs, I guess you could say. It's just so unique. Like, I've never seen that kind of spin on it before, and the bloodthirstiness of the spirits really... Thanks, Jinx. And the bloodthirstiness of the spirits really came through. The innocence of the main character in the very beginning, it was just heartbreaking to see what she witnessed in the very first chapter even, all the way through to the end of the book. Honestly, her entire story in the first book was heartbreaking, and that was when I knew that this was going to be an author for me. Humor in books, as with humor in movies or TV shows, I need stuff to be funny. Like, I can be talking about dark subject matter, I need to be able to laugh at some point during it. It's why I really prefer like action movies that have a humorous side to them, and it's why I like things like Supernatural, because they're constantly just joking around even though they're dealing with some terrible, terrible stuff. That's what I need. I need some kind of humor element, and while it was not a funny book by any means, there were several points that just entertained me enough that kept me engaged. The character interactions and the way that the main two characters behaved with each other in terms of her training were just so great, and it kind of gave you a very nice found family element, even though she had a family, and I won't really delve too much into that because of spoilers, but it was just... it was everything that I wanted. I have only read the first two books. I believe it's a trilogy. I really need to finish it and just read the third one already, and I just haven't gotten around to it, but I will be hopefully getting the audiobook for it soon, and then I will be able to see how that trilogy ends. So those were the 6 authors that I really wanted to talk about that I read this year that I absolutely adored, but I do have some honorable mentions that couldn't make it onto the list because I have only read one book by them, and the first one is Nicole Glover. She wrote The Conductors, and this book has to do with conductors on the Underground Railroad using constellation magic. They are actually former conductors on the Underground Railroad. Now they actually solve murders and mysteries in downtown Philadelphia in the 1800s, but it's like an alternate reality 1800s because magic is like everywhere and everybody uses it, and it's just so good. I also had an arc for this that I read back in, I think, January, and I absolutely adored it. I have the arc of the second one. I'm currently in the middle of it. I am loving it just as much as the first one, so I think that putting Nicole Glover on this list was a good call for me. And the next honorable mention is Jen Williams, who wrote The Ninth Reign. I'm sure that this has a series name, I just don't know what it is off the top of my head, So I read this, I want to say back in June, and I pretty much read it in one sitting because I used it as my road trip book, and it was phenomenal. Elliot Brooks talks about this series on her channel all the time. That is honestly why I picked it up, and I felt no differently about the first book. I do have the Bitter Twins. I would love to move on to it as soon as I can. Things have been very, very hectic. Obviously, I have a lot of series that I need to get to. If anything, that's what this video is pointing out to me. But yeah, Jen Williams, her world that she created, the magic systems that are here, the humor that she uses throughout the books, everything is just perfect for me, so I am fairly sure when I get on to the Bitter Twins, I am going to love it just as much as this first one. Another author that I have very high hopes for is Sylvain Neuville, and he wrote Sleeping Giants. I don't know if this has the Themis Files. I listened to this on audio, but I am pretty certain that I would enjoy the formatting of this just as much as I did with Illuminae, because it is all mixed media in form of kind of like an interview mostly. The audiobook was phenomenal. There was a humorous tone to the entire thing, even though some very, very, very dark stuff happens. It involves a girl who finds a gigantic hand in a pit, and it kind of unravels this entire thing of gigantic robots that are kind of laying in wake, sleeping in our world, in our Earth, kind of, as they unearth them and try and figure out ways to control them. It was amazing. The ending of this blew my mind. I have been intending to move on to book 2 for a while now. I have not yet done so, and I really need to remedy that. But again, that's why this is on this part of the list and not the first part of the list, is because I have only read this first one, but I enjoyed it so much. And my last 2 honorable mentions I also don't have any physical copies of to show you. The first one is Oliviadade, who wrote Spoiler Alert. I read not as much romance as I used to, but every time I do, it kind of feels just like I'm coming home. It's just easy and quick and simple and heartwarming, and that's why I love that genre as a whole, because I know what I am getting, and it's just a perfect way for me to wind down and not, it's like a palate cleanser, you know? And Spoiler Alert was no different. That book was amazing. It was every kind of Cinderella type of wish fulfillment fantasy that you could ask for, but for nerds, because the main girl, she is a plus-size cosplayer who is obsessed with a very Game of Thrones-like show, and she is super active on the forums, where she has befriended somebody who, unbeknownst to her, is actually the star of said show, who is also a super nerd. They end up meeting, they end up falling in love. Obviously there's a lot of drama throughout, but I read it in one day. It was amazing. I loved it so much. I have All the Feels, which is the second book in the series. I absolutely need to get to it very, very soon, but it hit every happy, nerdy part of my soul, and I loved that first book so much. And then the last author that I have to talk about to keep an eye on is Robin Schneider, who wrote The Other Merlin. I read an arc of this earlier this year and read it in a day, which is kind of the theme with a lot of these, if I was able to, because the writing was just so engaging that it allowed me to just sit down and fly through it and read it in one sitting or one day, and that is no different with The Other Merlin. I loved this Arthurian retelling. I'm a big King Arthur nerd. I have always been interested by King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I have always been interested in the movies, the stories, anything that I could get my hands on. I particularly love the TV show Merlin because it's everything, except for the last episode. I don't like to talk about that. But Merlin as a TV show, I sometimes just go back and rewatch because the little bromance between Merlin and Arthur in that TV show just make me so happy all the time. And it was kind of like that with The Other Merlin, except for the fact that it was a romance, because The Other Merlin is in fact a girl, because she is impersonating her brother, who is an incompetent fool. The humor was super anachronistic, like it definitely didn't fit with the time period that was trying to portray. I'm okay with that. I know that bothers some other people, but honestly, I loved it. I laughed out loud several times while I was reading it. The banter between all of them, the relationships between all of them was just so entertaining that it just kept me flipping the pages, metaphorically, because I was reading an e-arc of this. But I am definitely looking forward to the next book in the series. I cannot wait to see what Robin Schneider does with their story, because I was very pleased, but it was a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end, but I was still like, I felt like the story was satisfied with what it was trying to tell in that book. But yeah, I absolutely adored reading that first book in, I believe it's called, I don't remember what the series name is, but I can't wait for book 2. Alright, that went on for a lot longer than I intended for it to. There were a lot of authors that I discussed. I want to keep reading from every single one of them, and I hope that maybe you guys will pick up something by them because of this video. I will link all of the books that I talked about down in the description box down below. Down there you're also going to find my rep code to Unplugged book box, which is CAT5 for 5% off of one of your subscriptions to Unplugged, as well as my Book of the Month affiliate link, and links to my Goodreads, my Twitter, and my Instagram in case you guys wanted to follow me on any of those. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content from me. But other than that, that is it for me today, guys. I will talk to you in my next video. Bye!